Welcome back to The Joy of Vinyl. I'm Rick Coste. When it comes to equipment, I used to always say, or I still do, that the journey never ends. And it is a journey. It can be fun, it can be exciting, it can be expensive, and, well, frustrating. Each piece of equipment that I buy comes with hours of research, reading contradicting reviews, and second-guessing myself. The worse are the reviews. For any given piece of equipment, I can point to someone who loves it, I can point to someone who advises against it, and someone who shrugs their shoulders at it and points at something else that I should consider. It's very rare that you encounter a piece of equipment where negative reviews are actually a rarity. And guess what? I now have that piece of equipment. And what is it? It's the classic vacuum tube phono stage from Tavish Designs. Never heard of it? Well, keep watching. I've been through many upgrades over the last few years. I hit a point, I'd say a few months ago, where I was finally at a place where I could, sit back and enjoy the music without obsessing over the ever-present question, could it sound better? But to be honest, that question never truly leaves my mind, ever. It might lead me to, moving a speaker back and forth a few inches or adjusting where my listening chair is, even by a few inches or right or left. But the one piece of equipment which hasn't changed in quite a few years is the phono stage I've been using. I've been using the Project Tube Box S2. Now, I've recommended it many times, and well, I still do recommend it. It's performed well. And I even rolled the tubes a couple of times to tweak the sound. I think the last set was a new old stock Mullards. But the one thing that always bothered me about the Project's design is that it's not a true tube phono stage in the sense that the signal doesn't follow an all-tube path. The tubes serve as more of a buffer on the output, giving it that warm tube sound. Now, I've had fun with it over the years, especially with, trying different tubes in it. But that being said, I always knew that the Project would be the last piece of equipment in my setup to be swapped out. Whenever I saw a review about a tube phono stage, it would always kind of catch my eye, especially if it was or claimed to be an all-tube signal path. Now, why do I care about that? Well, it's really just the purist in me, and by purist I mean when it comes to tube amps. I don't knock solid state at all. My last amp was solid state and I absolutely loved it. But my heart lies with tubes. There's a difference in the sound that appeals to me. So while I was falling into a rabbit hole about tube phono stages one afternoon, I stumbled across a forum that referenced something I'd never heard before, the Tavish. What's a Tavish? Well, I found a few comments, all positive, about it being an all-tube signal path, just as I was looking for. My initial thought was it must be an old phono stage from years gone by that a few folks still used and still talked about. Either that or it was an extremely expensive product that only a few audiophiles knew about and only a few people could afford, like it was designed in Italy or something. But no, it took me 5 minutes to find the website. So, a bit about the talent behind Tavish Design. And this is taken right from their About page. They're a small business and they love tube amplification. Their specialty is, fortunately for me and my needs, phono stages. Now, the business itself was founded in 2011 by Scott Reynolds, who holds a PhD in electrical engineering. Now, his son also works with him, and together they both design and build a small number of well-reviewed products, all from their little shop in Amawak, New York. I've never heard of Amawak. And before settling on the Tavish Classic, I corresponded with Scott to ask a couple of questions, and he was always quick to respond. The classic tube design circuit has been tweaked by Scott to enhance the RIAA equalization curve to reduce its sensitivity to different tubes, which is a big plus for those of us who enjoy tube rolling. And I'll get to the tubes that Scott uses in just a moment. But the other thing is that the Tavish allows for both moving magnet and moving coil cartridges. The moving magnet signal path is 100% tube. The moving coil path has a transistor component to boost the signal. But since the cartridge I use is an Audifon bronze moving magnet cartridge, and my next upgrade will be to the black, the all tube path was exactly what I was looking for. Now, let's take a look first at the Tavish Classic. Tavish Design offers 3 phono stages: the Adagio, the Vintage, and the Classic. Now, there's a lot of similarity between the Vintage and the Classic, even in price, the difference being in the tubes that they use. The Vintage uses 6SL7s. I opted for the Classic because of its use of miniature tubes, of which I had a few extra in case I decide to switch them out now and then to try different sounds, because I can't help it. We'll start with the Classic's front panel. No surprises here. There's a power switch and a ready light comes on after about, I'd say, 30 seconds or so to indicate that the tubes are warmed up. You'll also notice that there are no gain settings. For moving coil cartridges, you can do so inside the unit, but for moving magnet, the gain is set at 41 dB. Again, that was perfect for me as I had my project always set at 40 dB. The back of the unit has a switch to flip between moving magnet or moving coil, and inputs too for each one. There's the RCA outputs, a ground screw, and the power input. Now, to get to the dip switches though, for cartridge setting, you have to go into the unit itself. You just unscrew the 4 screws and take off the top. But for moving magnet, the default setting is 47 PF. Now, PF is a measure of capacitance. Phono cartridges generate a very, very, very small signal. Now, this signal has to be accurately transferred to the preamp without losing any information. Now, the capacitance of the cable and the input capacitance of the preamp can affect this transfer, potentially altering the sound. I wanted to retain the 100 PF I had on the project for my cartridge, so I reached out to Scott to confirm that my preferred setting was okay, which it is. So now that I had my settings done, what about the tubes themselves? The Classic has 3 tubes, a 12AU7, a 12AX7, and a 5751. And all of these tubes are from JJ Electronics out of Slovakia. I did a little research on the tubes selected and how they might affect the sound in the different stages along that signal path. Now, I'm no engineer, nor do I pretend to be one on TV. So I asked Scott, and he told me the 5751 serves as the input stage and boosts the signal, which is also boosted by the 12AX7. The RIAA equalization takes place between the 5751 and the 12AX7, and again, between the 12AX7 and the 12AU7. He didn't mention this, but I have to assume that the 12AU7 takes the boosted, equalized signal from the earlier stages and sends it off to the amplifier with minimal distortion and probably high linearity and good fidelity. So how does it sound? Is it an improvement? Well, I'll start with this. For less than $3,000, I can't imagine that you would find a better phono stage. And this is less than $1,000. Remember, when you purchase a phono stage from Tavish Design, you're buying direct from the engineer and designer. There is no middleman, and there's no middle points of contact between the person who builds it and the end user. Now, that's a big reduction in cost. Tavish Design is a small family business here in the US with a passion for their product, and it really does show. So back to the sound. I mean, the design of it is beautiful, but back to the sound. As I mentioned, I've been happy with my Project Tube Phono Stage. I've used it and I've recommended it for years. The Classic Tube Phono Stage from Tavish is like adding another dimension to the music that I was already enjoying. Now, the best way to describe what I experienced was when I listened to The Doors' second album, Strange Days. I'd already listened to a few records with the Tavish after adding it to my setup, and I wanted the tubes to burn in, to give them time to burn in. So this was maybe 4 hours into a listening session, and it was getting late, so the only light in the room was the glow of the tubes. When the music's over, the sound stage in front of me suddenly just blossomed. Now, I hadn't quite experienced this before, and it's certainly not the first time I've listened to this record. I mean, I bought the record over 40 years ago. So I could hear Ray's keyboards way to the left of me and Robbie's guitar, way to the right, with Jim right in front and John behind him. Now, why do I say that it was, way over to the right and way over to the left? Well, with my eyes closed, the walls in my small listening room disappeared. That listening room isn't large, but the sound stage in front of me was larger than the room. It's like walking into Doctor Who's TARDIS. It speaks to the wonderful engineering done by Bruce Botnick and Ray Hargitay, and I bet he'd be pleased to hear the Tavish Classic reproduce that sound 56 years later. That's crazy. Obviously, the Tavish is not responsible for all of this. It's another component in a linear signal path, and a very welcome one. It's like a new spice that's added to a recipe you've been constantly trying to improve on. Taste buds change over time and over the years, and sometimes it just clicks. In this case, once that signal leaves the turntable, the Tavish sets the stage for everything that follows. And that's what you want in a phono stage. You want it to do that. You want it to make sure that the musicians and their equipment, that they're all in their proper places before the show begins. And it does deliver quite a show. Now, I'll leave a link to Tavish Designs' website in the description, and I promise you will not be disappointed if you do purchase one, that is. And if you do, let me know what you think. I'd love to hear from you. Now, if you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to the show over here so you'll know when new ones come out. And as always, thank you for watching. And until next time, please take care of yourself and enjoy your records.